Go.
Going.
We are live. Lots of mobility stuff to talk about today.
So many questions.
Yeah, we got a long list of things.
Mm-hmm. This is definitely something that is talked about all the time. Every day in the gym, I have at least one conversation with somebody about mobility.
Yeah. What would you say your first exposure to this whole kind of field and concept of mobility was? Like, to give you an example, mine was when I read Kelly Starrett's book, Becoming a Supple Leopard. Before that, I was like, had no knowledge of any of this whatsoever. And that kind of like opened my eyes to everything.
Yeah. I started watching his videos back mobility WOD days at the beginning before. I think he has a paid site now. And there was a lot to be learned with that for sure. It definitely caught a craze. Mobility craze is definitely, I think it has peaked and it's starting to come back down to earth, for lack of a better expression, which I think is for the benefit of everyone. I have ideas around mobility. I think and we'll definitely get into that during this podcast, but I think it is a very valuable tool when and only when it's used appropriately. Yeah. It can be a time sucker. It could be a spin the wheel thing. It could, if it's not used properly, you don't really get the benefits of the work.
Yeah.
And that you're just doing it in a way that it wasn't intended to be in the beginning. It's kind of like, we've talked about this with nutrition a few times. It's like, this is an outline of something like paleo. Now, if you do it the way that it was designed to do, it can be a very good thing for you. If you abuse it or just misuse it,
eat a bag of nuts type thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It kind of follows the same sort of line. The questions that we got all over, from like, I can't move, to I'm too flexible, to specific limitations that people are feeling, to just ideas and differences between flexibility, mobility, for a question that we got. And then I also I want to add in stability into that conversation.
I like that.
Maybe that's somewhere to start.
Yeah, let's start with that.
Okay, so flexibility, when you hear the term flexibility, it's going to be talking about the soft tissue, specifically the muscles' ability to be stretched to end range.
Yeah. When I hear that, I think of like people doing the splits and, just crazy feats of being able to open up their joints.
Yeah. Lots of length there.
Yeah.
In the muscles. I'm not saying if that's good or bad. It could be a bit of both, but that's what the flexibility component would be.
It.
Yeah. Mobility standpoint is more about the ability to move a joint through its full range of motion. So that is actively moving that joint through its range of motion, not passively. Like flexibility would be like you static stretching, like reaching for your toes as a flexibility test.
Yes.
I mean, you have that ability, but is that even important? We're going to get into that a lot. But the mobility, I would say, is more important because it's the ability for you to actually carry the joint through that range of motion and be in control.
Yeah.
Which brings into stability, which is your ability to control the movement through its available range of motion. So the ability to control movement through the available range of motion of the joint. Mobility itself is the ability for a joint to actually be moved through that range of motion. And then flexibility is more about soft tissue length and that sort of idea.
Can we give the audience an example for that so that they can actually kind of envision the differences between each of these?
Yeah. So if I were checking, let's say hip flexion. So hip flexion being, if you're sitting in a chair right now, your hip's in a flex position. Your upper leg is probably at 90 degrees to your trunk unless you're leaning way back or something like that. So your hip's in a flex position. If I have somebody lay down on their back and I push their knee down and try to so I bend their leg. I'm trying to explain this to somebody who's listening. So you're laying on your back, you take one leg, you bend it up as far as you can towards your chest.
Yep.
And then I take my hand and I push that knee down towards the rib cage. If I get full flexion through that hip, then there's no real flexibility or mobility issue, right? That joint can be moved through that range of motion due to the flexibility of the muscles themselves and the mobility of the joint, its ability to move through that position. Now I take that same person and I want them to do an air squat. And they get to about 90 degrees and they stop. That's an air squat isn't as simple as it seems. There's a lot of moving pieces there. But I know from their assessment that I did on them that joint is able to get into full flexion and they're able to fully flex their knee as well. So it's not the ability for the joint to get there. It's an inability for that person to create that position. So that would be a stability issue, not a mobility issue.
Yes. Nice.
So when I'm looking at somebody's mobility, I have them do an air squat, for example. I don't think it's enough just to watch somebody do an air squat and be like, oh, your ankles are tight. You need to work on your ankle mobility. That I'm not saying that's not the issue, but I'm saying to watch somebody air squat and see, for example, their heels come off the floor and just automatically be like, oh, you need to work on your ankle mobility. I don't think you're doing the best service for that person.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes I have difficulty addressing, like if it comes up in a class, say we're doing overhead squats or something, people ask like, why am I leaning forward? Why can't I get into the bottom of the squat? So on and so forth. It's like, well, here's a list. Like it could be a number of different things.
Right.
These may be the most likely culprits, but again, you really can't know just from watching a few squats, like you said.
Yeah, it's a more in-depth conversation than that. So yeah. I like the fact that you're like giving them a list of things to check in on first. I kind of created a list. So first thing, if I'm having somebody do an air squat, I want to check their ability to create tension and brace through their core. So that midline stability piece. If they're not bracing, then we know that any movement that you do is not going to be as efficient or as strong if we have a loose base being your midline. And then from that, we want to create some sort of core to extremity pattern when they're moving. And that's going to come from a load sequencing thing. So for example, if I watch somebody squat, we'll use the air squat because we've been using that so far. So I watch somebody squat and they come up on their toes. Like, okay, let's try that again. Now focus on creating a nice stable midline. Coach them through that however you would. I like the example of trying to blow up a balloon, but it's sealed off, right? So you're like, big breath in, breathe out, and your breath is blocked. That can help you kind of brace your midline. And then you want to walk them through that core to extremity pattern. It's like, okay, so you need to keep that. And then let's run through the air squat, right? Whatever your cueing is for that person, it's going to vary depending on the person and their squat, but I'll use the general cues. Your hips are going to go back slightly first, and then you start descending into the bottom of your squat. Knees are going to track over your toes, wherever that is for that person. If they can demonstrate that pattern and get into a nice bottom position in their squat, their ankle mobility was fine. What was probably happening was they're shooting their knees forward first and coming up onto their toes. So for that individual, mobility work isn't going to make them a better squatter. Working on their load sequencing pattern and their awareness around a squat is going to cure the fault that we're seeing. So I think this is kind of my argument with mobility work right here. It's like, yes, it can be used really, really well, and it definitely has its place. But I think it's been over prescribed by coaches and trainers when they just don't have an explanation for what's going on. It's just easier to be like, I'll go work on your ankle mobility and just create like a dissociation with that problem. Now you gave them something to go and work on, but you could have fixed it on the spot. So to kind of recap the 3 points that I have before you do mobility work, midline stability, core to extremity patterns, and then awareness. If they haven't been down in the bottom of their squat ever in their life, they don't know what that feels like. So they're just not going to have this stability to support themselves in those positions. That's going to be the big problem. So you can check in on that simply too by having somebody go up to the rig, grab the rig, get down into a squat position. If they can show full flexion of the hip, flexion of the knee, and their ankles are in a good position when they're supported by the rig, they have the mobility and the flexibility to do it. What they are lacking is the stability, the strength, and the general awareness of what that bottom position is. So that's what has to be coached to that individual, not an over prescription of tying this person in a million. Have you seen that? You know the one I'm talking about?
I
The
think
meme
so.
on it comes up on Instagram all the time, like CrossFitters stretching, and there's like bands tied around every single part of their body, and they're
That's
just
great.
suspended in air from these bands. Like, you don't always need that. Okay. So that
Oh, that was good. I like that. Yeah.
that
totally addressed some of those other differences we mentioned at the start too. I think like the difference between sometimes mobility is not always the answer type
yeah,
thing.
yeah. I really wanted to get that message through to
Yeah,
people listening to this podcast and make sure they're doing their due diligence and checking in on the priorities of movement first, and then getting into the extras, which are awesome. Mobility work is amazing when it's used properly. It can change lives completely.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely change performance on a dime. But you just want to make sure that whoever's doing the mobility work is doing it for the right reasons, and it's actually going to get them in a direction of improving their performance or well-being or decreasing, whatever.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Beautiful. It's funny though, same thing as a lot of the other stuff we talk about, namely nutrition.
Yeah.
It just kind of gets like blown out of proportion. People always thinking that since one thing is good, then I have to increase the amount of that exponentially and it's going to be even better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're doing a lot of work on like a keto seminar right now.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm sure you're diving into the ins and outs of keto.
Yeah.
The positives and the negatives. Absolutely. And the misuses.
Yeah, that's
and
another
all those
one
things.
That's another one where things just kind of get blown out of proportion. Like people hear, fats are good, saturated fats are good. And then that's all of a sudden, that's all they eat. They're just eating bacon and butter all day long. And well, that's not good either. So
right.
Yeah, it's good to kind of see that across different fields.
Yeah, for sure. I think with mobility at the gym, there's I think some people might be able to relate to these three things. It's kind of like, is this you sort of situation? So we can work through all the questions that we got and all the points that we want to make.
Yeah.
Try to help these people. There's going to be a group that just can't find consistent improvements in their mobility. So an example, we were talking about this before we started recording, somebody who we've checked in on the things, the midline stability, quarter extremity, the awareness, we've checked in on all that stuff, and their ankle mobility is definitely limiting. They're kind of caving in on themselves or for whatever reason. And when they do some mobility work for their ankles, their squat is very improved. And then they can carry that position through the session. But then when they come in the next day to train again, it's gone again. They're back kind of where they started, and then they got to spend another 20 minutes on their ankle mobility, and just it's kind of a vicious cycle. There's other people that they see an increased mobility for a short amount of time, then they return to just being locked up. That's kind of a question that I got from Instagram as well. And then there's a group of people where mobility work just doesn't change their range of motion. And that's
Which one are you?
Me personally.
No, just talking to the people through the mic.
Yeah, I mean,
telling them to think about it for a sec. Which one do you think you are?
Yeah. It's a slight difference between the person who can't find consistent improvements and that person that gets locked up after doing mobility.
Yeah.
The person that can't find consistent improvements probably isn't exploring their new range of motion appropriately. That makes sense?
Make sense? Yeah, I would say so. Like you find that new range of motion, for example, in your ankles, but then when you return to squatting the next week, you kind of just default to your old movement pattern, I guess, that doesn't use that additional range of motion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I mean. Totally.
Like that's a funny thing that I've found with mobility is that this doesn't go for everything, and it also depends on your daily lifestyle, like whether or not you're at a desk and chair and computer all day long. But anyways, a lot of things, once you've kind of unlocked that new mobility, again, just to use the example in your ankles, if you're squatting heavy-ish, once or twice every week and you're using that new range of motion in your ankles, I find that often it's enough to maintain that mobility, at least kind of like 80-90% of it over a period of time.
Absolutely.
Which is cool, because then you don't have to lay on the floor for 10-20 minutes every day after that, and you can just, you do your quick warm-up, maybe a couple other mobility drills to address whatever you need to work on, but then otherwise those other things that you've worked on and kind of unlocked, if you're using that under load, under tension, it's still there.
Yeah totally. I think if there is one mistake that I see most often in terms of mobility work and then the maintenance of that improvement, is exactly what you just said. They work so hard on creating these new ranges, find new end ranges, they find new mobility and new stability in certain positions, and then they just don't use it.
Yeah.
It's just as simple as that, right? Like you go from being able to squat, right, hamstring the calf, you're locked down, you got your nice stable back position, there's no tucking under, there's no excessive flexion and extension through the spine. You've got it, and then you load up too heavy for that new range of motion, and it forces you to resort back to your old habits.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Got to be able to
see that come up a lot.
Yeah. I mean, we're going through a test phase at West London right now. So people at West London that are listening to this, work on your mobility through the beginning parts of this next progression, and then force yourself to stay within those ranges through we'll use squat again. Every single time you squat, that's your new squat pattern. If you can't hit the percentages that you wanted to that day, that's okay. You're exploring a whole new range. You need to find strength in those positions.
You're still gaining in other ways just because you're not increasing load. Yeah.
And in the end, it's going to make a huge difference over time instead of just getting stuck.
Yeah. And I think that should be another priority. Like, for instance, if it's built to a tough load in a back squat, like focus on that in those lighter loads when it's higher repetitions. Like, don't just fly through those, like I got to get warmed up so I can get up to that heavier load. Like, really focus on those, kind of emphasize those positions. You write it in the warm up all the time. Like, rig support squat hold, for example, emphasize perfect positions. Like, you do that for a reason, right?
Yeah.
That's to kind of start that thought process right away. But then when you start warming up, lifting with those lighter loads, like that's the time to really reinforce that range of motion and those mechanics, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, get down there with an empty bar on your back or something that's very, very light for you. Just sit down there.
Yeah, totally.
Feel that new range, explore that new range. You're going to be, again, we've already gone through the checklist. I'm not going to talk about it anymore, but this is my last time, I promise. But you brace your midline, you follow proper squatting mechanics and load sequencing to find your bottom position. You are in a support position now. You could chill there in theory, as long as you wanted to. And when you're ready to stand up, you're going to activate and you're going to stand up. No problem, no pain, no discomfort, no shifting, no shaking, nothing, because you're in your most stable position to squat from.
Yeah.
If you don't hit it, your awareness is going to go away. You're going to forget what that full range feels like.
Actually, speaking of the book I brought up at the start, same thing. I'm going to bring it up again after this, but like, I thought that book, if there was one thing that I really learned from that, it was like how to hammer down all these different little, what can you call them? Like kind of mini prep movements that you do before you go into a lift, if that makes sense. Kind of like the bracing of the core, the driving your feet down and twisting into the ground. Like depending on what the movement is, you're placing torque on the bars if you're bending it in towards your body. Like all these little different things. I thought that book was incredible for that. And like that was really kind of changed the way I lifted weights in general, but also my thought process. So I think that's one. There's many resources out there like that nowadays, but I think if anyone wants to learn a little bit more about that, that'd be a good option. And you're probably familiar with a ton of other ones as well. Yeah.
And you're a thorough dude, so you're going to read the whole book.
Well,
I think people like that book is wicked, especially if you start at the start and actually read the whole thing. It's but it also has a lot of flashy pictures and a lot of stuff that people want to find. So it's easy to just be like, whatever, man.
Yeah.
I don't really care about that stuff and skip to the mobility, but you've missed all the gems. You got to do your due diligence in your movement patterns and it's the little things first.
It's great because it's one of those ones where the more you learn, you can come back, revisit it, and then something that didn't make sense earlier on will make sense. You'll go, okay, I get that now. I can implement that, just go back. It's more like a textbook, really.
Yeah. It's a resource of many.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Right on. I talked a little bit about mobility and stability. I want to give you guys some tips as to how to differentiate between the two and maybe discover for yourself if it's a mobility issue that you're having or a stability issue that you're having. So, I think people have a routine that they like to have. And I talked to Kayla about this. Honestly, dude, it took me like half an hour yesterday to try to explain to Kayla what I was talking about because I wanted to make sure. So that first bit about like, I didn't want this is my struggle. I'm going to let the listeners into this mental struggle that I had about prepping for this podcast.
Honesty is good.
Mobility is great, but it's not the only thing. So I was trying to come up with a way to phrase that without discrediting the importance of mobility, but making sure that everyone was like going through their checklist first.
Yeah.
That I said I wasn't going to mention again. You guys know what it is. Okay. So this is kind of what it took me so long, but finally I got it. And this is how it kind of went down. So when you walk into the gym, before you sit on a foam roller, before you stick a lacrosse ball in your armpit or in your butt, before you grab a band.
On the cheek, not in between.
Yeah, go on the cheek, sickos. Or before you give yourself the quartering band stretch where you just pull all your bits apart.
Yep.
Let's check in on some things first. Question number 1, can you improve the range of motion by running through proper muscle activation drills first? So things like terminal knee extensions, the rig-supported squat, monster walks, banded lateral walks, movements that activate whatever muscles are needed for that specific movement. So I've done my core stability warm up, right? I'm doing hollow holds or anti-rotational stuff, something to get that firing. Yep. I'm getting my legs going. I'm getting the muscles actually awake. I'm not walking into the gym cold.
Yeah, that's right.
And then just trying to do a squat, right? Like most of us won't be able to do that. Walk in cold and squat free of pain and have a free movement pattern. So can we do that? It's surprising to me that when I just focus on the movement itself and really force people to think about what they're doing through the movement, rather than the traditional idea of like mobility and flexibility, that they just refer to good patterns and then they're good, right? So if you can go through activation drills, hit your full range of whatever movement it is, you don't need to add mobility into your warm-ups. It's not going to be important for that person. A good thing for you to do, you mentioned it, I'm not sure while we were recording or before, was just like retest stuff for your mobility.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Cause we've all been there before. Like mobility stuff can be boring as hell. Like even if you've experienced some gain, some progress in terms of your mobility and noticed it, improve your lifting or in your workouts or whatever, like it can be let's be serious. It can be super hard to maintain that mobility stability work because it's just not the fun stuff, right? You want to get to lifting the weights and doing all the fun stuff. So I think like anything, super important to have something tangible, quantifiable, where you can track and record your progress. So I think something super simple to do would be something like maybe you grab a buddy, you show up to a class even like 10, 20 minutes early some night, and you just kind of focus on, let's say it's an overhead squat. You really want to improve your mechanics for that, be able to have the barbell up completely straight above your head, all that type of stuff. Maybe you just get a buddy, you do a couple of those with PVC pipe, they record you on their phone, flip, done. That's all it takes. Mm-hmm. You have that initial video, and then maybe that's your focus for the next month. Like you're going to spend, again, it doesn't even have to be that much, 5-10 minutes before 3 or 4 classes a week where you hit these couple mobility drills, couple stability drills, that kind of thing. Come back, take another video, even 2-3 weeks later, reassess. I think just being able to see like that market improvement in your movement pattern would be huge, like reinforcing, motivating, help keep you going. Because a lot of the times I don't think it's easy to notice the improvements to mobility and movement patterns unless you have, again, like a video where you can actually view that.
Mm-hmm.
So you're kind of, by not having that tangible marker, you're totally missing out on, I think, a powerful motivator, really, is what it is.
Yeah, I agree for sure. That motivating factor is something that is very, very important with if you're going to go on some sort of mobility improvement.
Like the same reason that you're recording how much you lift in your squat every week or recording your Cindy time or whatever, that's the same reason why you're going to have this baseline assessment for your mobility before you start that adventure or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, for sure. Got to have that test retest. Without that, like you said, it's going to be like somebody asking you what you had for breakfast on September 17th. No, I don't know a single person that could answer that question right now. It's too far away. You're not going to remember where you came from. It's too much time has passed in between the two. So if you have a picture or a video of yourself squatting on September 17th, we're recording December 12th, I would actually have some sort of tangible thing to look at.
Yeah.
And then you can make adjustments to your routine, to your pattern, to your focus, depending on what you see, what's improving, what isn't improving. Did you improve at all? Because if you haven't improved over 2 months, then you definitely have to change what you're doing because it's not working.
Yeah, that's another good point. Yeah, don't waste your time.
Yeah.
It's not working.
I got another one here. Just back to discovering between if it's a mobility or stability issue, is your active to passive range of motion. A hamstring mobility test is a good one for this. So use this example, somebody laying on their back, bent knee, push the knee down towards the rib cage to see knee flexion and hip flexion. Now, if I straighten that leg, have somebody support the knee and the ankle and force you to end range through your hamstring, have them assess that, mark it in some way, again, whether it be a picture or a mark on the wall or something, some sort of measurable piece. Let go, let that person lower the leg back down, and then have them actively pull their leg up to that position. If there's a difference between where you were passively able to take that hamstring and where they were actively able to take that hamstring, it's not going to be an issue of flexibility and mobility again. It's not going to be that. It's going to be there's either the strength or the ability to find midline engagement or engagement in the muscles that need to bring that leg up.
Yeah.
So you can stretch or roll your hamstring out till the cows come home until you create that ability to control that range of motion that you do have. You're not going to see the benefits from it anyways.
So maybe you're already going here, but I think this is a perfect time to address why being over flexible could actually lead to injury. Because I think people could probably easily picture this now that you just explained that. If you're over flexible and lacking some strength, well, guess what? Your leg is just going to flop right down like a noodle and poses risk of serious injury, especially if it's over some heavy load.
Yeah.
If you have that strength to resist that as you go farther and farther into that range of motion, let's say I use the example of sports. I think that's the best one. Not too many examples where you're going to be laying on your back, hamstring flex, and someone jumps onto you. But let's say that happens. If you don't have that strength, you're over flexible, probably more likely to get injured. If you have some of that strength, then you're probably better able to resist that object or whatever it is, preventing that excessive range of motion.
Yeah. I think you answered it right there. Whether you meant to or not, you definitely answered it. It's a strength thing. Right? So if somebody is hypermobile, and the person that asked this question is totally hypermobile. Like she's got some crazy range on everything and she's pretty long limbed too. So just kind of everything can kind of go everywhere if it wanted to. Passively, could take it through whatever you want to. And actively, I'm not sure she would be able to. And that's where you need to start. You need to work on either isometric holds or just very low load movement as your warm up.
Yeah.
The activation warm up for this individual, don't stretch anymore. Stop it. Right? You don't need you don't need any more mobility. What you need to do is create activation to the muscles that you're going to be using that day. So for example, if you're squatting, you need to work through that full range of motion that you have, maintaining all the checkpoints that we talked about, and create stability and strength in those positions. I really like, from a programming standpoint, I would program that person very slow tempoed movements to create awareness and to create strength in the full range of motion. I wouldn't program for this person anything that's really dynamic in nature to start. And I actually did some programming with this person in the past, and that was pretty much her focus.
Yeah.
Even her weightlifting stuff was very slow tempoed stuff.
Yeah. Don't need any leg swings for warm up.
No, just silly things, right?
Someone who I love, I think, is an unbelievable resource for this, Marcus Philly on Instagram.
Yes, functional bodybuilding stuff.
Yeah, like his warm up pieces that he uses for it's basically the exact same thing that you just said. Like the difference between working on flexibility in your warm up versus working on range of motion with stability and maybe some lightweight. I think he's got some super cool stuff for that.
Yeah. That's what it comes down to for that person, is making sure that they can create stable positions in there. And if they're very hypermobile like this person is, you have to learn where to stop your movement too.
Right.
Don't let your ability to get into a compromised position be the position that you're squatting from.
Yeah.
Or pressing from.
Yeah.
Or overhead.
So like a perfect example of that would be snatching and just letting the bar go all the way the hell back behind your body, as opposed to just keeping it locked out overhead.
Yeah. Like a good warm up for somebody who's snatching and is in this hypermobile situation is like 10-second tempoed overhead squats. So you hold it with the bar overhead 10 seconds into descending into your bottom position, 10-second hold at the bottom, 10 seconds on the way up also, and then 10-second hold at the top. Just a very general advice to somebody who is in that situation that will be snatching in their movement or in their training for that day. Really want to make sure that you're creating stable positions as you're going through those ranges. Otherwise, you're just as susceptible, if not more, than somebody who lacks mobility. Any position that you get yourself into that isn't supported by your body is a compromised position. Whether it looks like you're folded in half when you're doing a squat, or you're all willy-nilly, knees going all over the place, spines in flexion extension all over the place just because it can, that can be just as detrimental for sure. I think so really you just want to do your mobility work from a perspective where it's about positioning and alignment for mobility. And we have a lot of questions about what to do, and we can kind of segue into that, I guess. But when you're doing mobility work, you want to focus on creating positions and alignment in those positions. We know that postural alignment or that midline stability is going to be the base of all movement. It all has to start there and then go out. So if we're not creating stable positions to move from, our mobility is going to be compromised. And that's a nervous system response. Like if you're not comfortable squatting below parallel, and I saw this when we squat Monday.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. We had a squat assessment on Monday. So we had the rig supported squat hold, and this one individual, we talked about it at the gym in the moment, but I'll just kind of leave it anonymous just in case they don't really want their name to be used. But I'm watching them do their rig supported squat. Beautiful. Amazing squat. Positions are wicked. They have a bit longer levers. So typically somebody with longer levers, you see some weird things start to come out, but it wasn't there. It was solid squat. Put a bar on their back. Not the same story. And in talking to this person, I discovered that it's just they're not comfortable squatting in that end range. So the conversation for me with that person is, well, you need to go lighter and you need to use your full range of motion and create strength and stability and awareness in those positions because your mobility is not an issue. The reason why I took the conversation that way is because this person is like, well, I feel like my ankles are a little tight. So I take her back to the squat, the rig supported squat, get her back down. I'm like, you're good. That's perfect position through your ankles. There's nothing wrong with your ankle mobility. It's just a confidence thing. Your nervous system will just lock up. Once you get into a certain position that's not comfortable, it's just going to lock you up.
Yep.
And you're going to feel like you can't get down into that end range of motion. You just got to take it back a notch and work yourself through that as best you can. Because that awareness issue will affect your ability to contract your muscles, to relax where you need to, and just have awareness of the load sequencing pattern too. I think that gives some background to mobility work. Now we can assume that people have done all the things that we're talking about and just answer some questions. Maybe these questions aren't even questions anymore after we talked about the things we did at the beginning. But
yeah.
What do you got there?
Well, let me pull these ones up.
We already covered the hypermobile person.
Oh yeah, I think we already went over those. Yeah, so I had a couple points on just talking about, we kind of alluded to this, but not fully, I don't think, how some kind of immobility issues can lead to other consequences. So what I mean by that is, if you're not able to get down into the bottom of the squat, that doesn't just mean that you're not able to get down into the bottom of the squat. It means that you're impairing your ability to, one, squat heavy. You're impairing your ability to kind of quote unquote make gains, whether that be to body composition or muscular strength, because you're kind of, that entire second half in the bottom of the squat, you're totally missing out on that. So just imagine, I mean, you can just picture it this way. Like, it's the difference between you're gaining muscle in that top half, but that bottom half, since you're not even going down there, then you're missing out on a whole bunch of extra strength gains, right? And so that's what I mean, where it can affect other goals, like even if that is something like body composition. So I think kind of reframing how you look at this can just be another way to, I guess, motivate you and improve on these less sexy issues that people often neglect. And then just shifting that scope a little bit, if we look at like conditioning workouts, maybe there's something with just a piss pile of air squats or something, or even something like thrusters, I think is a good example. Same thing, if you're not able to efficiently go through that range of motion comfortably, under control, at a tempo, then, I mean, I don't have to tell you how that's going to negatively affect your performance and conditioning pieces.
Yeah.
Whether that be just an inefficient movement pattern, so you're expending more energy to go through that move or that lift because you are compensating, and that's what's using extra energy. So kind of the full range of motion, if you had awareness and control, would be most efficient, but your method, because you have to make these compromises, you're expending a ton of extra energy. So that's another way to look at it, I think.
Yeah.
Just to, whatever it may be, give some extra motivation to improve.
Yeah. Yeah. From that performance goal, it may not make a difference on 10 reps at a time, right? If you had somebody with really good air squat, somebody with a very, it's like a labored air squat, it just looks like it's a lot of effort for that person. And every squat looks a little bit different.
Yeah.
10 reps, maybe not a huge difference, but if you're looking at the sport of fitness itself as from a competitive standpoint, it's not just going to be air squats. So if there's a squatting movement of any kind, say there's 100 reps accumulative over the workout, whatever it is, that it's going to start to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. Just from the efficiency and the transition time and the kind of the turnover rep to rep.
Yeah.
And then also just the fatigue that sets in when you're moving inefficiently.
So when you have that choice at the end of class, you have a little bit of extra time and you have to choose between, do I want to do a 2K row? My conditioning's already pretty good, but I'd like to improve it a little bit. Do I do that 2K row? Or, my squat's fucking horrible, but I don't want to work on my mobility. I think I'm just going to go do the row and try and improve my aerobic capacity. It's kind of like, well, like what's the biggest bang for your buck there?
Yeah. It's a matter of priorities for sure.
Yeah.
And a little bit of ego, big, not a little bit, a big bit of ego mixed in there.
It outside at the door.
Yeah.
Sure.
The ability to just check it and move on.
I think the mobility issue is, well, it's more magnified in CrossFit, I would say, because that's how you're being quantified, really, is your ability to complete reps at a high tempo in a period of time. I mean, there's other measures, but that's one of the major ones. So that's why it gets magnified, because the goal is to kind of optimize your movement patterns as best as possible. But in other sports, I don't think while mobility maybe, it's sometimes a concern, but I think a lot of athletes just kind of piss on it. I don't need to work on that.
Right.
Like, how is that going to help me? If I'm a hockey player, why do I need to be able to overhead squat? Like, I use, just based on experience, I use this example, but hockey players notoriously have god awful mobility, like hips, awful, shoulders, terrible.
Yeah.
And I can tell you certainly that it's not a concern for them. Like, it's not something they think about. And I sure as hell never did. Like, I never appreciated that. Well, if I can put my hip at a 90-degree angle, like as if I was sitting cross-legged, or bringing one leg up to cross over my other one, and if I'm unable to put that to 90 degrees, who the hell cares? How's that going to affect how I perform on the ice?
Right.
But same thing there. It's going to affect it massively.
Yeah.
You're taking, I don't know how many, probably thousands and thousands of strides per game. If you can improve the efficiency of your stride, then of course it's going to translate to more power and more efficient movement patterns, which means more energy over a long period of time.
Right. And you'll be more resilient. You want to say it's hard to make an impact for your team if you're not in the lineup.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right. Yeah.
If you get yourself injured.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the injury could happen. Doesn't have to happen on the ice.
No.
It could be anything. It's life.
Yeah. Right? Could happen after the bar.
Yeah.
But also and we talked a little bit about this before the podcast, so maybe we can segue a little bit into this, but the injury doesn't even have to happen locally. If you have poor mobility in your hips, doesn't mean it's going to be a hip injury. It might be somewhere else because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Where someone's feeling discomfort or pain, or where that association is being presented. So say it's in your shoulder. You got shoulders hurting, whatever that means to that person. Right? It could be so many different things. And pain it's hard to understand what somebody means when they say it hurts.
Oh, absolutely.
It's difficult because just
especially people who don't like have much anatomy, or like call it body awareness. Like maybe they never played sports or whatever.
Yeah. Like you could have one person, oh, my shoulder hurts. Like it hurts. I can't do anything. And it could just be sore. It could be some sort of inflammation thing. Or if they could have a completely torn rotator cuff and they're just nails. Right? That's possible too. They're just downplaying what they're feeling. There's just such a broad spectrum. And then you always get Kayla went and broke her elbow a couple weekends ago now, I guess. So we're at a merge, and the merge, I don't know, first person you see, whatever. Rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. What? Kayla's tough. She's not going to say 10. It could feel like her arm's going to fall off. She's not going to say 10. You get someone else in there who's a big baby and they got a sliver rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. Oh, 10. Does that person get priority over the person who actually broke something, or is it in pain? Like, it's really, really difficult to get that. But that's a conversation for another day, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's just say pain's in the shoulder. The point you're making is it might not be a shoulder mobility issue that's causing your pain.
Right.
What else could it be?
I can't explain it to you, but it sure as shit could be, I don't know, an issue in your hips. Maybe your hips or your pelvis or something like that is not level. Maybe one leg's a little bit longer than the other one and you don't address that at all.
Yeah.
It could be a ton of different things.
Yeah.
Again, I can't explain it to you because I'm not a chiro, but
yeah,
I think people, as long as people appreciate that, like, your body is this one functioning unit where things you experience are not local, right? Like,
yeah,
the body is one. If something happens elsewhere in your body, that's going to affect the rest of your body, whether that be, it could be in terms of anatomy and soft tissue issues. It could be, I mean, of course, it could be other physiological issues like inflammation and all that. That's going to affect the entire body. But again, like, as long as people appreciate that, I have this issue in my right shoulder. I also have this chronically tight hip flexor, but I don't think those are related. Well, more than likely, like, yeah, it's going to be related.
Yeah.
So just appreciate that if you have some other issues, addressing those could in fact help some other issues that you have. And I mean, I've had this myself, and I'm by no means the only person. Like, kind of have this. We were talking about this before as well. Like, it's almost like too good to be true, like magic, where you kind of make this mobility progress, or you kind of like hit that next level, and then all of a sudden, like, this nagging chronic pain that you've had for as long as you can remember is just suddenly gone.
Yeah.
And you didn't get massage, or you didn't take any pain meds, or you didn't get acute, whatever. Those are other issues. But I'm just saying that you've just improved the mechanics of the rest of your body, and then all of a sudden a seemingly completely unrelated other issue just disappears. Like, that's kind of what can happen. Like,
yeah,
that's how the body works.
Totally. I agree for sure. Like, knee pain is a common thing that people get when they're squatting, right? So again, we got to go back and do our due diligence with the movement itself and make sure that this person has an awareness around the movement itself and the expectations of their body and the range that they're expected to go through.
Yes.
So they've checked out on that. Let's say we're good. Everything's going great. Knee pain when they're squatting. I have had way more success in focusing on hip and ankle mobility for knee pain than focusing on the knee pain itself and trying to, quote unquote, I'm going to say fix. I'm using the hand quotation things because you're not fixing anything, but my knee pain got fixed by focusing on my knee itself. Not very rarely have I seen or experienced helping someone find relief in focusing on the knee itself, compared to working on like quad mobility and ankle mobility. And it makes sense when you look at the mechanics of that joint and what it does. But just, again, another example, because I really don't want to like prescribe something to anyone because it's too complex for that. Like, I wouldn't say, oh, you have knee pain, focus on your ankle and hip mobility. That's not what I'm saying, but just using it as an example of, if you feel knee pain, like you said, with shoulder pain, it might be the hip.
Yeah.
Might be something going on in your hip or in your positioning. If you're a little bit forward on your overhead squats because your hips are a little bit tight, shoulders are working a heck of a lot harder to try to keep that bar in position. You're all rotated forward. It's not your shoulders hurt because it's overcompensating for a different part of the body that's limiting you.
I've seen some interesting data, not very encouraging data, but interesting, showing that the rates of major knee injuries like torn ACLs, torn MCLs have just skyrocketed among kids compared to before, quote unquote, technology days. So like, before everyone was sitting at a desk hunched over all day long, the rates have just skyrocketed. And these are kids with, healthy bones, healthy joints, etc. And it's because it's not because kids' knees are all of a sudden less sturdy than what they once were.
Still being made the same.
Yeah, it's because they're losing earlier than ever the ability to sit in the bottom of that squat position.
Mm-hmm.
And I just say that because that's a marker of all these other mobility issues that have developed from sitting at a desk, which contribute to that, for example, knee injury.
Yeah, totally.
So I think
they're being retaught, but in a bad way, right? Like, what are we trying to say? Instead of being able to, so teaching like a pattern for someone, or teaching their squat as sitting down instead of teaching the squat as squatting full range. Right.
Yeah.
So the joint's not used to going through that range of motion.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I just mean like also just plainly not using that range of motion at all. Because the kid just sits at the fucking desk all day long.
Yeah.
And adults. But
yeah. Like we don't live not very many people are in a position day to day where they're using their joints to their full capacity in terms of range and stability and all those things. So you got to be working that in an environment that's not natural per se, but like it has to. You still need to move those joints through their range of motion.
I think if you look at the general population as a whole, it's incredible how many people just simply cannot. I think this is a perfect example, like sit and hang out in the bottom of a squat.
Yeah.
Like that's a huge issue. Like if you can get to that point where you can do that comfortably and you have some current existing chronic pain, if you develop the capacity to be able to do that, to be able to sit in the bottom of that squat position, I think in a lot of cases that chronic pain is just all of a sudden going to disappear. Yeah. It's not because of the squat, right? That's just, I mean, it's like when we talk about nutrition, I say like the weight loss, the body composition are side effects.
Right.
That's what this is as well. It's just a side effect. Like being able to get into that squat position has all these side effects because in order to get to that point, you improved, the ankle mobility, the hip mobility, and so on and so forth. And that just kind of like alleviated all these, whatever it is, crunched together, pissed off nervous system.
Yeah. I love that for sure. It's not a coincidence.
No,
that's for sure.
Yeah.
So many things are affected. Even just your consistent conscious effort towards improving yourself will help decrease the pain as well. Yeah. It's like, there's so many things to that.
Do you think someone will ever go to their family doctor and say, I have chronic low back pain, and then the doctor asks them if they can get into the bottom of a squat and tell them to work on that?
Dude, I hope so.
Instead of giving them NSAIDs or other powerful pain meds that fuck up the rest of your body.
Yeah, I can't.
Probably not.
I hope. Yeah. Do I want that? Yeah. Do I think it's going to happen? I'm not entirely sure. And I'm not blaming the doctors.
No.
It's just a system. It's a rushed system. I think a good resource for people too, Dr. CJ De Palma. I've talked about him before on this podcast before. The movement doctor. Yep. Finding relief through movement. He has some good myth busting posts about mobility out right now too, which I'm digging. Things like foam rolling. And just it's interesting to me. I might be butchering this. So dude, if you're listening.
Not a lot of data on foam rolling.
Yeah. I might completely demo this. This is going to be the last thing that we're going to be able to talk about on this hour. But so CJ, I apologize if I botched this completely. But concept is this: foam rolling. Does it help with sore muscles? Yes. Why? Not sure, but could be related to the fact that when they're on that foam roller, it hurts like a bitch, right? Your pain that you're experiencing exponentially increases when you put the foam roller on your quad. Anyone who's put the foam roller on their quad right above their knee knows what I'm talking about. Shit hurts, man. So you have that, and it's like, oh God, ow, 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 ow. And you force yourself to like find your Zen state. And then you get off the foam roller, you're like, oh man, that feels better.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Right? Not sure if it's just the fact that it feels better than when you thought you were going to die because it hurt so bad, or if the foam roller actually helped you feel better. So that perceived that like the RPE scale, kind of that the rate of perceived exertion sort of thing. It's like, this is better than it was, so therefore my pain's gone. I'm not really. The idea is
so what you mean is that don't know if it's actually the foam roller doing the trick or if it's the fact that the pain kind of forced you to go into like almost like a meditative like state where you focused on your breathing, and maybe that was what actually helps the recovery.
Yeah. Think about it this way. I'm going to pinch your arm as hard as I can. It's going to hurt, and then when I let go, it stops hurting.
Yes.
Right? Was it me letting go that caused less pain, or were you just in more pain than baseline because I was pinching you? Right? It's like chicken and egg thing. What's going on there? I thought it was a really interesting point. And again, CJ, I'm sorry if I botched that for you, man, but the post was cool. I'm trying to get it out there. We got a lot of questions to get to still, but
probably take a short break and then come back.
Yeah.
Maybe. If we have time.
Yeah.
If this is the end, though, sorry.
We'll probably catch you in a couple. Peace. All right. I'm going to wrap up this mobility conversation since we haven't even gotten to half of the questions that we received. Got to extend this episode out a little bit to get to that stuff. So if we didn't answer your question in the first half, don't worry.
Yeah.
We're going to get to them right now.
Hours too bloody short.
Yeah. We got these are very, well, not super specific, I guess, but just the general consensus out of two of these questions is just how to prioritize your approach to your mobility work. So one being, when everything's kind of a mess, where do you start, right? You got, again, we've gone through the checklist of just proper movement, and you're like, yeah, my ankles are janked, my hips are pinchy, my thoracic spine might as well be a 2x4. There's no movement there at all. I don't know what to do. Where do I start? I think just in general, for somebody who has a grocery list of mobility restrictions, is to set up an actual program for yourself to set up a very deliberate approach in improving those specific areas. I wouldn't put a hierarchy in terms of like, oh, if you have ankle mobility issues and thoracic mobility issues, focus on the ankles first, then the thoracic. Both of them are going to be a problem. So come up with a routine to do this. And Chad Vaughn has a really good system for this. Chad Vaughn's an American weightlifter, super awesome weightlifting coach, really good guy. He has a really solid Instagram account too. If you want to follow that, it's at Oli Chad. And he's in charge of Vaughn Weightlifting, does a bunch of work with CrossFit HQ in the past, Power Monkey Fitness. He's a big name. He's an Olympic athlete.
Yeah,
he knows his things, and not all athletes are great coaches, but this guy is definitely an exception to that rule. His approach is this: come up with, everyone's going to have something that can get better. So come up with, maybe you have one thing that's glaring, 2 things, 3 things, whatever you have. Come up with a routine in your warm up and in your cool down every single day that's going to help you improve those positions. Not every other day, not when you feel like it, not only as a warm up, not only as a cool down. Come up with 3 mobility exercises that you are going to do every single time you train, every single time you step foot in the gym. You're going to do those 3 movements in that order. So say from this grocery list I got here, say it's ankle mobility, thoracic mobility, and anterior hip mobility. Let's get you doing a banded calf stretch, couch for the ankles, couch stretch for the anterior hip, and working your thoracic spine through some sort of extension, whether it be on a foam roller, med ball, kettlebell, something like that. So those are 3 very general things. But the only way that you're going to see improvement by doing those things is to do them that often. And then there's a follow-up question to this. What happens after you accomplish the mobility goals? This is a very important piece, and we talked about it before, is you have to use it.
Yeah.
Use your range of motion. Create your new range in your warm-up. Work within that new range during your workout. Don't stray from it. Don't let yourself, it's like, oh, well, I want to squat heavy today, so I'm only going to go down to here because that's what I'm comfortable with. Stop that. Make it lighter. Go through your full range of motion. Then before you go, make sure you revisit those exercises and restore that range of motion again because it may have been lost over the course of your workout. Tighten your right back up. That would be my recommendation for this person.
Lovely.
Yeah, anything to add?
Oh, you nailed it.
Got that one? Sweet. Follow-up question. I'm a very immobile person. Should I spend more time on mobility and less time on training? Or is working on my training going to help improve my mobility? I think the prescription that I just gave you.
Yeah, I think you just answered that. Yeah.
Do that.
Yeah.
You don't want to spend 20 minutes on your mobility before and after your workout. That checklist can be done in 10 minutes before and 10 minutes after. You're out of the gym, and the same amount of time you would have been there anyways, chatting with your friends, just shooting the shit.
Yeah.
It doesn't add
anything. I like that idea. Sounds like a hell of a lot of decision fatigue that you don't have to worry about when you just set that deliberate plan beforehand. Set it, boom, done, do it every day. Mm-hmm. Then you walk into the gym, you don't have to think about what the hell you want to do to warm up, what you want to do to quote unquote stretch and all that.
Yeah.
That's the worst.
Yeah. And almost every gym that's organized and like has a class running or any other athletic training thing that I've been to, there's always going to be a specific warm up for your workout within the time that you've committed to be there for that hour anyways. So all this is doing is just taking care of that general warm up portion, get your body warmed up, do some activation stuff, work through your mobility work, get into your class, you're good to go. It's not going to add anything, I don't think. If anything, it might give you a little bit more focus and end up saving you some time because you got stuff to do. Totally. And when you're done. There was another one about overhead squats here, dude. Where is it?
Oh, yeah. I think it was what's kind of the most common area of need when overhead squat is not optimal.
Yeah, you got it. It's is it more hip or shoulder mobility?
Yeah, I think that one we kind of already talked about as well at the very, very start.
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of have to do, a number of different assessments to really determine that. You can't just look at the overhead squat. It has those ones you just said. Those are the most common issues for sure. But yeah, you have to do a couple extra assessments really to know, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with you for sure. An easy one, do an air squat. If your air squat's on point, then it's probably your shoulders.
Yeah.
Just as a general recommendation there.
Yeah.
I would say, so the thing with overhead squat, like you're not putting your shoulders in an awkward position. Like even if you have a little bit of tightness through the shoulders and T-spine, you're going to be able to get that bar up overhead. If you really focus and dial in on that lower body mobility and just your squat pattern as a whole, your overhead squat's going to reap the benefits of that for sure. So I guess, yeah, we kind of answered it, but focus on just your air squat. I think, and this is another thing from Chad Vaughn, the air squat is the most, like, first thing, starts the seminar off, what's the hardest squat? Or I don't know how he words it. Hardest squat, most complex, most challenging. I forget what word he used. But everyone said overhead squat. Naturally, right? Like, what's the hardest squat to do? The overhead squat. He's like, nope, it's the air squat. Very few people air squat perfectly. And that's why they're having troubles with their back squat and the front squat and then the overhead squats because their base of squatting is just not up to a perfect standard. And he was very adamant on a perfect squat. That dude is focused on the squat. He loves it.
Didn't he do something with, or talked something about you should be able to kind of sit in the bottom of that squat and just have the heavy barbell rest on your shoulders and your hands at your side? Like you shouldn't, without even having to support that barbell on your shoulders while you're in that squat, like it should just kind of sit there.
Yeah. He uses the words support and muscled. So when you're in the bottom of a squat, you shouldn't feel like you're forcing anything. It should be just a support position for your body.
Yeah.
You're just at your end range for your squat, and you can chill there forever. And he does it really well in this seminar. He like starts at 135, squats down, holds it 20 seconds, stands up, re-racks it, puts 225 on. And this guy, he's been lecturing to us for the last 3 hours. It's not like he didn't sneak off and do some mobility work and warm up, right? He's cold. He's colder than anyone else. He's just been standing there. 225, same thing, 20-second hold, stands up, 315, same thing, 365. It's like, come on, 405. He's doing the same thing, but he's supporting the weight. He knows he's strong enough to, his leg strength is enough that he can stand up out of the bottom, no problem. He could spend as much time as he wanted down in the bottom. It's not going to fatigue him at all because he's not muscling that position.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's an expert level thing. It's not I don't recommend that to just test your mobility, but just an example of where you can take it. Another movement specific one we got is how to fix rib flare. Midline stability first. Got to check that box always. Mm-hmm. Think about it this way. Put your hands over your head. Your ribs flare. Your midline's not active. So I'm like, okay, activate. Squeeze your midline tight. Midline's tight. Arms come forward slightly from the center. So, okay, no. Put your hands over your head. Rib flare again. No, activate. And then the hands come back down. It's like, no. Now find a piece of wall. Brace your midline. Push yourself into the wall. Then try to reach up overhead. If you can get your hands up overhead and your ribs don't flare, it's not a mobility issue. It's your ability to, again, to create that stable base for your movement to build off of. It has to be core to extremity. Every single time it has to start there. So that recommendation number one. And it's not like, oh, no, I'm squeezing. It's like, no, squeeze harder. And then, like if I was coaching this person in a one-on-one session, we're assessing their shoulder mobility, like reach overhead. I see a rib flare. I'm like, okay, tight here. And I put my hand on their stomach where I want them. Like, okay, reach again. And then they start rib flare. It's like, no, squeeze this more. And if they can slowly fix that just by activating and focusing on that position, again, your mobility work isn't going to make a difference there. You just got to focus on that engagement of the midline. Now, if you're finding rib flare with overhead movements, checklist is going to be lat mobility and T-spine mobility would be a good 2 places to start. That's what I recommend. I work with this guy doing programming for him. I've never met him. We've gone through all the assessment stuff and all that. And it is something that he is really actively working on improving. But knowing his sport history, I would confidently assume that it's going to be T-spine and lat. Like any sport that's contact related, you're going to have a bit forward because you're in that protective position of yourself. Yeah. And this guy is in contact sports. So you're kind of hunched forward in that protected position all the time. So I would start there. You got to get your T-spine to move through extension and rotation. And then simple band stretches for the lats can make a world of difference for that. Last one here from the Instagram questions. Super horrible overactive trap advice.
Is that like provide an example?
What's that, sorry?
Does that mean like provide an example of super horrible trap advice, or what does that mean?
I think knowing this person, they have an overactive upper trap, I think is what is being alluded to here, and the advice as to how to fix that. Let me start here. Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result is not going to work.
Yes.
So if you're someone who is suffering from chronic pain or something that is constantly an issue for you, you're not doing something right. You have to really zoom out and look at your routine as a whole. It's going to be, you're not going to like what you see when you do this. And this goes for everyone, right? Everybody, if they zoom out far enough, they're going to find something that can be improved. It's not just one person, it's everyone. For myself, I can think of 5 things off the top of my head that's holding me back from being better than I currently am. So if I want to get better than I currently am, I need to check those 5 boxes. Am I going to do that? Time will tell. But if I want to get better, I know that those are the things that I need to do a better job of. So for this person, I recommend doing that first. You got to zoom out as far as you possibly can. Zoom out to your week schedule. Zoom out to what you do through your day, the positions you find yourself in. Are you always at a desk? If you're at a desk, are you constantly hunched over? Are you doing anything to combat that structural imbalance that's occurring? So you have overactive upper traps. So are you so focused on that you're doing it more? Are you putting yourself in positions where those traps have to be active constantly? Are you taking the time in your training to drop the load back far enough? 1. And then step 2 to that, working back from a movement standpoint to where you're refining the fundamentals first. If you're not willing to do that, your pain isn't going to go away because you're not getting to the root cause of your pain, which is always going to, again, I said I wasn't going to say it again, but I'm going to say it again. Midline stability, quarter extremity movement, working yourself through a full range of motion and an awareness of what that full range of motion is. If you record yourself and you're like, that isn't a good air squat, you have 2 choices. 1, you're going to do your work to fix that air squat to improve your position in other lifts like snatches, cleans, getting out of your car, sitting down on the toilet, sitting at a desk, whatever it is. Or you're going to ignore the fact that your movement quality isn't good or isn't to the point where it's not going to be a detriment to your health. And in this case, pain is the driving force of that, or what's bringing it to the surface. Like, those are your 2 options. You're either going to change it or you're not. So you got to start there, right? Like,
yeah, kind of what we've been talking about, I guess, really. Very, very similar.
Yeah.
Came up at the very start. It's just kind of like zooming out, looking at the big picture. What is the real issue?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like you said, shoulder pain probably isn't your shoulder that's causing the issue.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So in this case, I'm willing to bet money that it's not the upper traps that are actually causing the issue. It's either movement patterns over time that have caused some sort of chronic pain, or the inability to take a step back and focus on strengthening the base of your movement, which again is the midline stability piece.
I thought of something during that. I think we're kind of through all the questions anyways, but or the majority of them.
Yeah, that's all the Instagram ones that I got.
For people that do spend the majority of their day at a desk, sitting down, hunched over, I think just something as simple as like setting an alarm, even like every, do it like every 90 minutes, even if you want. I think you can do less than that, but start with something manageable and super simple. Set a timer, get the hell up, go for a little walk, and just like move your joints through a little bit of range of motion. It doesn't, It can be like literally 1 to 2 minutes. Something as simple as like doing a couple air squats, hanging out in the bottom. Maybe you're doing some like simple arm circles. It can be anything, like something like that. If you can consistently do that over a long period of time, that will do wonders. I have a confession though, actually based on that. So when I was still in school, obviously spent a ton of time at a desk, hunched over at a computer or at the bench in the lab, just pipetting solutions all day long. So of course, like bent over, hunched over, like head down, really like because you have to like look super close at things to be able to see them. You're working with a lot of tiny solutions and you have to be like super careful with all of that. So quite often I would, a couple times throughout the day, even if I did it just once, it was usually a success for me. I'd usually go like into the stairwell, go up to the very top, 7th floor, because you don't see too many people up there. This was in my lab coat usually. I'd just kind of throw down like a couple handstand holds, do like some glute stretches, hang out in the bottom of the squat or whatever. And like I found that even just being able to do that like once or twice a day was unreal. Like you feel so much better afterwards.
Yeah.
Even just cognitively, like mental clarity, like just getting that blood flowing does wonders for the rest of your day. Like I think you can do this even if you find yourself like dozing off kind of towards the end of the day. This is beneficial for that as well. So it's kind of like a win-win.
Yeah. The movements that you chose are awesome too, because it's end range stuff, right? Handstand holds,
That one, yeah.
end range, overhead,
great.
Squatting, end range. It's a
Not sure what someone would think if they ever saw me doing that, but I don't really care.
Yeah. You felt better.
Yeah.
That's all that matters. That's good. It doesn't even have to be that crazy.
No.
I think, to start, just walking up to the 7th floor and then back down
would
be a great place
Absolutely.
to start.
Yeah.
We can start adding some things in as you feel a little bit more fancy.
Yeah.
Getting the work in.
Yeah. It's so easy just to melt into your computer chair all day long.
Yeah. Yeah. You get that brain fog going. And I mean, when you're doing a job that requires concentration, it's going to affect your performance there as well.
For sure.
Right on. I think let me check that text question one more time, because there's a lot of pieces to it. I want to make sure I got them all for him. We got is it possible to do too much too quickly when trying to improve mobility? That's a
good question.
That's a good question for sure.
Fair.
Let's see. I think there's yes, I guess would be a short answer.
That would be my answer too.
Yeah. What's your reasoning?
My answer is yes, for probably not the reasons you would expect. Mine are more so for a reason of burnout. And I don't mean burnout in the sense of what we talked about a week or two ago, where we went over all these crazy mechanisms that are going on in the body and brain that lead to the consequences of overtraining.
Mm-hmm.
I mean burnout in terms of you're just spending so much time on mobility on a daily basis that you just all of a sudden you're at the gym for like an extended period of time. It's taking away from other things in your life. You're like focusing on this way too much. You're not seeing the gains right away. Like based on the amount of time you're putting in, you're like, what the hell's going on? Like I've been working on mobility for an hour a day the past week and I don't feel any different. So I mean it in terms of burnout in that sense, where you're just putting way too much time and effort into it. And it's kind of like, I mean, we can imagine how that can kind of wear you out and lead to just like negative feelings, negative thoughts around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with that. That would be pretty much the only negative that would be the big, not the only, but the big negative that I could see from doing too much mobility is that burnout itself. I 100% agree. The only other thing, this isn't really by doing too much too fast, but just kind of brought this thought into my head, is making it too much of a focus and taking away from a proper warm-up and prep work for your workout.
Right, yeah.
So spending too much, coming into the gym, laying on a foam roller or a lacrosse ball, and then trying to max out your back squat without anything in between, that would be a mistake.
Yep.
You got to make sure you're going through your proper activation drills, you're exploring your end ranges and getting yourself warmed up properly, following a proper increasing load sequence to whatever that heavy weight is going to be for the day.
Right.
I've seen that a couple times. That's pretty much it for the too much, though.
Yeah.
You hit the nail on the head. I think that's what it comes down to, just a mental burnout.
Yeah.
That can occur from that.
Well, and I think, like, that being said, I think there's some pretty unique ways where you can still work mobility into your training. So if you do feel like that should be a major focus for you, you have more issues than the general population, I think you can still you can still have that higher volume of mobility without getting some of those negative consequences or potential side effects that we talked about. So what I mean by that, like, for example, it would be maybe instead of doing back squats that day, you do something like Bulgarian split squat. Can be a little bit more demanding for especially like hip flexor mobility. So if you get a lot of chronic low back tightness, often could just be because you're hunched over from hip flexor tightness. So it's throwing something in there like that, where you're really just enforcing, again, proper mechanics, maybe a slow tempo. Maybe you are moving your foot out a little bit further away from the bench to get a little bit of that added stretch, like even just for the light loads, like the first couple sets.
Mm-hmm.
I think just different variations or different lifts like that, I think, can be worked in to work on your areas of focus instead of, like you said. So this is really very similar to what you said, just jumping to that back squat, working on some of these other variations instead, where you're still gaining fitness, getting stronger, building muscle from these, but you're also simultaneously working on your mobility.
Yeah. And like movement therapy.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, like, I think a lot of the stuff, I would say a lot of the movements that I'm referring to, I think they end up being unilateral stuff, I would say, quite often. And I mean, that's probably something that most people, I can say this for myself included, I probably don't do quite enough unilateral work. It's easy because one arm, one leg, you're not going to be able to lift the big, heavy, sexy weight. You just think squat, push press, things like that. But the unilateral work, I mean, you're going to benefit hugely from that as well. Not only for the mobility, but for your overall fitness as well, I think.
Yeah. Finding balance in your strength.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's super important.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. That's a good one. I think knowing this person too, that is going to be really helpful for them personally. So yeah,
it's good.
That was a good one. Yeah. Right on.
That's the goal.
Yeah. It's cool when people ask questions and we can actually get to them. I mean, like the movement thing is a big thing, right? Like you actually have to move your body through a range of motion in order to see any benefits in the first place. And then also to maintain the benefits that you're getting from all that work.
Yeah.
Because this is time consuming.
Yeah, totally.
Like you said, it's not the sexy stuff. It's not the heavy back squats. It's not the snatches or overhead squats. It's just work. Mm-hmm. But if you do it consistently over time and then work within those ranges, you're going to see benefits for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think keeping mobility work as a whole, I think the more simple you can keep it, especially if you're just starting off, the better. There's a lot of flashy stuff out there right now.
Yeah.
Mobility is it's almost like it's crazy that it's almost created its own corner of the fitness industry. Yeah. It's like all these different methodologies of training the body in terms of strength and conditioning. And then there's this whole other area that's like mobility and then the crazy gadgets that go along with it.
Well, yeah, I guess that's one thing we forgot to bring up. Maybe this will be our last thing that we talk about, but
yeah, because
you just nailed it there. Like there's so many crazy gadgets out there nowadays that are just building this mobility industry.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned beforehand the what was it? It was like an attachment for a car waxer or something.
Yeah, man, it honestly looked like one of those handheld high-powered car waxing machines. Yeah. And I mean, what I'm saying right now is coming from a point of ignorance because I have no idea what the purpose of that machine is or what the goal is by using that machine. Yeah. It might be great. It might not be. I don't know anything about it. But I'm seeing somebody hold a car waxer on somebody's shoulder.
Regardless.
I'm like, what is going on? My favorite comedian has a term for, that guy that has all the tools. He has a term for it. He calls them kudas, which is short for barracuda, because they're just attracted to shiny objects and they're not even sure if it's going to be beneficial to them, right? Like you put a shiny object in the water for a fish, like a lure, they're going to bite the lure even though it has a hook on it.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like if something really has to be marketed to get people to buy it, I'm not sure. Like, just healthy food is an example of this. How many commercials do you see for healthy food?
A lot.
Right. Like I turn on the TV or listen to the radio, it's like Wendy's commercials, McDonald's commercials, Tim Hortons commercials, right? It's like a marketing thing but there's no commercial for bananas. Right? So
never seen a commercial with like a dancing avocado.
Right. I mean, I wish there were.
Yeah.
That'd be a great way to get people to eat more, because we know how powerful marketing is. I mean, needed a whole. We were talking about before, the whole psychology and like neuroscience of marketing.
Oh yeah, it's ridiculous.
It's crazy.
Well, I know that a lot of these major companies, I can't give you any names, I just know for a fact that they'll actually recruit like trained neuroscientists nowadays for their marketing industry.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's just pretty interesting. Like, literally, what things can we do to basically mimic the effect of drugs in the brain so that people will buy this or do this or whatever?
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
It is crazy. And I think these way out there mobility, like I'm digging the whole jigsaw thing. I'm digging it. I've been using it on myself, and I like it. But again, I'm not really sure. The question that I ask myself is like, if I didn't do this, would I feel the same? And is it actually making a difference? Like, I don't know. And I can't give any recommendations on that stuff because I really don't know anything about it, because I'm not sure if it's improving my performance or
at least
like
with that,
so
like
many factors.
Worst case scenario, if you don't notice an improvement, then just go cut some wood.
Yeah. Use it for what it's for. Yeah, it's funny. Lots of shiny objects.
Yeah. Cupping, have you ever had cupping done?
I haven't. No,
I haven't either. I know there's a lot of different stories on that, like whether or not it's bogus or actually does anything.
Yeah.
But hey, we've talked about placebo before, so if you go in there to get some cupping and think it's going to do something, then it could do something.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
The next thing you know, you'll go to the practitioner and they'll have 10 toilet plungers out, and they'll just be going down your back with the toilet plungers and not telling you that it's not actual cups.
Yeah. Yeah. Could you imagine? That'd be so funny. Oh man. Yeah, it's yeah. We could probably have a whole
maybe we should
episode on that itself. Just the power that like motivation and the placebo effect of right. Like if you believe that, if you wholeheartedly believe that this is going to make you feel better, then it's probably going to. And if you go into it thinking like, if you go into like an acupuncture treatment, for example, and you're in the mindset that it's bogus and it's not going to work, it's
probably less
not
likely. Yeah.
Less likely, I'm sure. Absolutely. Or you'll experience some sort of weird discomfort that isn't actually there just because you created it in your mind.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you've ever got acupuncture done and done well, you don't feel a single thing. It's amazing. It's the best thing ever.
I fucking love it.
It's so good. But I've talked to people where it hurts them. I'm like, oh, well, do you like needles? They're like, no. I was like, okay, so there it is. But you just don't like needles. So when you got needled, you're like, ow. You had the same response. Like, that actually didn't hurt.
That was something I had to get used to, because I did, and I still do hate needles. Like, if I get blood drawn, I get like lightheaded. My palms and feet, like if someone tried to grab onto them, they wouldn't be able to. Their hands would literally slip right off. Like, it's disgusting. But
like that Eminem song?
Yeah. Yeah. But I kind of eventually got past that, and then I liked it before that still. But once I got past that, realized that it's just teeny tiny little needles going into your skin.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah.
Still don't like getting blood taken though.
No, me neither. It makes me feel all queasy.
Yeah.
Right on. So I think we got through all the questions.
Oh yeah.
Covered the fun stuff. Closing remarks from me is just to treat your mobility as if it's part of your training, and actually have a focus when you go into your. Again, I like Chad Vaughn's thing. Pick 3 movements to do. Test, retest in your warm up. Train within those ranges during your sessions. Revisit them before you go home, just to reinforce that that new range, that new position, and focus on movement basics before you get into your mobility stuff. If you're just not performing a squat correctly. It might not be, well, it's probably not due to a mobility. That's not the right word either. It may or may not be due to a mobility restriction, but the only way you can find out is if you run through a proper squat assessment, check your awareness, and use mobility as a tool to help your recovery and help with your positions.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I don't have too much, just kind of something you think you need to do but struggle doing it. Just remember that you can kind of reframe the way you look at it. Like, it's not necessarily just mobility. It's this thing that, like you said, like, treat it more than mobility. It could be something that's actually limiting you from reaching those other goals, whether it's getting fitter, getting stronger, even improving body composition, overall health, whatever it may be.
I really dig that idea that you have, that it's like, it's just part of something and it will help with regardless of what your goals are.
Yeah.
Like, body composition goals.
Yeah.
Will
totally
definitely be benefited from focusing on mobility.
Yeah. And then, like you already mentioned, have that plan. I think that's huge, having that targeted approach so you don't have all that decision fatigue. I like that idea.
Yeah, that's cool.
Decision fatigue is the worst.
Yeah.
I get that a lot. Terrible at making decisions. That's why I get you to program for me.
Yeah.
Think about it. It's great. I think that's really it.
Cool. All right. Well, if you want any movement assessment screening done, right? If you're listening to this and you're like, I don't even know if I'm moving correctly. I know Shokes at the gym has her functional movement screening certification, so she can run you through some formal functional movement screening. So reach out to her if that's something you're interested in. Yeah. It's a service that she provides. For myself and yourself, if you have us coaching one of your classes, and you've listened to this podcast and you have any questions about anything that we talked about, let us know. If you're listening and you are following us on Instagram, or through our websites or whatever, the more questions, honestly, the more interaction that we get, the better.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
For multiple reasons. One, it forces us to, if we don't know, learn something new. If we know and don't know how to explain it, it forces us to understand it a little bit more. It's just, and it keeps the podcast going, because if we don't have stuff to talk about or stuff that's of interest to the people that are listening, which is growing episode by episode, which is pretty cool.
Forgot to have a party for the 10th episode.
Oh yeah. What's this one going to be? 12? 13?
So this is a good point. Listeners, I messed up on the number of the last one.
What?
I know. We're gonna lose listeners. But I think I put episode 11, and then this week I put episode 11 again or something. So we just got to correct that, acknowledge that we skipped a number, and then make this, I think it will be 13 or 14.
Cool.
I would say. Yeah.
That's fun.
So what, one more before Christmas, I think?
Yeah.
And then?
Yeah.
Probably looking to get a few guests in the new year, right?
Yeah. Hopefully, if people want to come and hang out and chat with us.
Yeah.
It'd be nice. Got a couple people interested in their.
Yeah. That'll be fun.
It's definitely going to be a learning thing. Hour for myself if these people come on, that's for sure, because I got some stuff to share.
Yeah. Losing my voice. It's time to shut it down.
That's it.
If you guys think of anyone you want us to have on, or maybe you're interested in coming on, just let us know.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. Remember, just keep moving.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Don't be lazy.
Yeah. See you next time.